Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks very much for your patience. We've had a little bit of technical trouble on our end, but we're going to keep working to get all of our panelists with us this afternoon. But we have our first panelist already on with us now, so we can go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to LubeTrends and ILMA Town Hall. And first of all, I want to thank our LubeTrends Town Hall sponsor, Chevron Oronite, for their generous support of these town halls. I'm Caitlin Jacobs, ILMA's Director of Communications. Unfortunately, Holly Alfano is sick and she cannot join us today, so I'm pleased to step in and serve as your moderator today. Today, we are discussing some of the most important issues coming up for lubricant manufacturers this year. We'll have some introductory content on these topics, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A. You can submit your questions during the presentations or at the end of the session, either one that works for you. So without further ado, let me introduce our first panelist today. Jeff Leiter is ILMA's General Counsel. He has decades of experience serving the association and its members, and we appreciate him taking the time to be with us today. And we also thank all of our attendees for being with us. Jeff, if you are ready.
I'm ready. Is my volume okay for everyone?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our LubeTrends session today. As Caitlin indicated, we're going to discuss a number of issues that are affecting the members that your staff, Holly and her team, and then Ben and my associate here at our firm and I are working on for the ILMA membership. We thought we would highlight some of these when we get to the end. There's certainly a lot going on here in Washington and certainly a number of the states that we're constantly monitoring or getting ourselves involved with on behalf of the association and its members. If you go to the next slide, we might as well go dig right into the issue. As Caitlin mentioned, I've got a lot of experience with the association. Actually, in January, I started my 42nd year of having the privilege to represent the association and its members. One of the first things I worked on back then as a very young associate with dark hair was the Federal Research and Development Tax Credit. It was initially enacted by Congress back in 1981. We've seen 16 extensions of the law. We're currently at a flexion point where we'll discuss in a second, it's become an issue. But besides the federal government, there have been well over 40 states that have put in place their own form of R&D tax credit that the members enjoy. Ben Idzik, my new associate lawyer, has a detailed article on the R&D tax credit that'll be
what did you see? I'm like in
the April issue of Compoundings that really gets into how the credit works and the idea that the federal government's not subsidizing folks doing reverse engineering and such. The important thing for me is that over the last 40 years, ILMA members have stressed to me the importance of what this R&D tax credit means to their companies. I mean, if you go to the next slide for me. So as a result of that, we've spent a fair amount of time working on the issue here in Washington. Historically, the statute, as you know, over this period of time, would allow for a dollar for dollar, 100% credit against the company's taxes for the R&D. And again, it's beyond just lab and engineering. One of the things when Holly first joined ILMA in 2015, we worked on together was effort by the business community, which was successful at the time, to make the R&D tax credit permanent. So we didn't have to go back every 2 or 4 years and get Congress to reauthorize the tax credit. Then we fast forward to Trump's administration. One of the things that he did in exchange for a reduction in the corporate tax rate, they went back and said that the R&D tax credit would, the dollar for dollar basis would expire as of last year's tax year, and that folks would have to capitalize those R&D expenses in not less than 60 months period of time. The IRS actually issued guidance last December as to how this new capitalization is supposed to work. The important thing for me is the effect that ILMA members are telling me that it's having on them. That without that dollar for dollar tax credit, and particularly in this inflationary economy, it's putting significant constraints on their cash. And that's a problem for your staff. It's a problem for us working on your behalf. So what we've done is we've gotten together with other business groups. We're urging that Congress come back and go back to the 100% permanent extension of the tax credit, so that it's immediately dollar for dollar in the year that it's taken. Unfortunately, while there's bipartisan support for putting the R&D tax credit back the way it was, politics being what they are in here in Washington, it's been tied up in debate not only with the debt limit ceiling, which is coming up soon, but also in terms of other legislation with respect to the budget. And what's happened is there was a child tax credit that's also expired, and the politicians have linked it together. If you're going to do the R&D tax credit, we expect you to also, and this is aimed at the Republicans, reinstitute the child tax credit. Estimates from the Congressional Budget Office and others suggest that the reimposition of the tax credit would create 81,000 direct jobs. They've got an estimate about 140,000 indirect. The issue right now is what confidence level we have that'll be reinstated. I'd describe it as marginal at best at this point. We think it'll happen, but we just don't know if we can get it done in the supply chain. We may be coming to the membership, asking them to contact their members of Congress and encouraging them to support them, knowing again how important this is for member companies' cash flow and the way they operate their businesses. That's it on that subject. Caitlin? I think I also have this one as well. This is one that's emerging for the association and its members. There's a lot of attention that was highlighted to drinking straws and plastic pollution in the oceans. But over a period of time, there's been a significant effort both at the federal and state level to legislate on plastic packaging. We've got bills and laws that have been enacted at state level, most notably like California with respect to post-consumer recycled content. Industry has been working at a number of states with advanced manufacturing in terms of chemical recycling. But what's starting to emerge in a number of states right now is something we call extended producer responsibility. Essentially, from a policymaking standpoint, this puts the onus on the producer of the packaging to be responsible for the entire life cycle of that package. It shifts the cost intentionally from taxpayers and puts it up onto the manufacturer with the idea that they would either use less packaging and at the same time more packaging that's more recyclable. Our friends and members who are in Canada are going, this is nothing new. We've been living with this extended producer responsibility in Canada for several decades. Clearly, it's something that's been adopted and in place in the European Union. But it's now really hitting here in the States, and certainly from our perspective, we focused on it more from the standpoint of automotive lubricant products, particularly the quart motor oil bottles made from HDPE, and the difficulties in terms of access on a regional basis to those reclamation facilities. Next slide, please. And right now, in terms of what's on the books, you've got California, Colorado, Maine, and Oregon that have adopted or enacted laws that have been put in place extended producer responsibility. I will tell you that last year, bills were considered in 12 states. Right now, there's 4 active bills under consideration, primarily in the Northeast, including New Jersey, and that New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. There's 2 models I think you should be aware of with respect to EPR. One is the municipal reimbursement, where essentially the manufacturer is obligated to reimburse the local jurisdiction for the trucks and the costs of sorting and the operational expenses tied to operating a local reclamation program. That is the model in Maine and Oregon. The other is the full producer responsibility, where a producer responsibility organization, or PRO, is set up, and it essentially manages the recycling process in the jurisdiction. Probably the best example I can give to you is the American Coatings Association has set up a 501c3 foundation that operates something called Paint Care, where effectively if you go in your garage and you got a 10-year-old can of paint that had some paint left in it, you can take it to the local Sherwin-Williams or other paint retailer, and they'll take that can back with the product in it and properly return it. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at from the lubricant perspective is you've got California and Colorado that are on the PRO model. Both California and Maine are actively in the process this year of building out their regulatory programs. So this is going to be a key year, particularly with California, in terms of how that program is set up and the kind of funds and monies that are being looked at. The problem that comes up for the ILMA member that we're struggling with and trying to work with folks on is that historically there's been a very low recycling rate for the HDPE bottles of motor oils. What you're looking at is they're viewed as being contaminated simply because they had oil products in them, and so they have to be segregated from a lot of other plastic waste. On that basis, a lot of the bottles that are collected are typically landfilled or incinerated. And when you look at the way some of these EPR statutes are set up, both of those avenues of incineration or landfill are not preferred at that particular point. So where do things go? Interestingly, we were going to have a speaker at the meeting that was canceled because of Hurricane Ian, but a group is formed called the National Lubricant Container Recycling Coalition. Currently, it has 11 members. Exxon, Chevron, Valvoline are big players in the group. Some of the bottle manufacturers, cap manufacturers are also part of that group, as well as the Petroleum Packaging Council, or PPC, is participating in the group. The NLCRC is looking at trying to address specifics with the automotive lubricant bottles in California and these other states in terms of lobbying. But they also started a pilot project working in the Atlanta, Georgia area to see how they can get those bottles aggregated into a firm that shreds them and then sells those shredded materials back to resin folks to make new bottles. So far as I understand, the pilot program has been working pretty well. We do have a feature coming up in next month's compoundings on the EPR issue. And I think we're on to our next subject and probably another speaker, Caitlin.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeff. We really appreciate your insights on those particular topics. Next, we want to talk about PFAS, and we have our panelist, John Howell, with us. John, if you would like to turn on your camera and your microphone and take it away, please.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. And I think you've got control of the camera here. It says so on my screen. So if you'd like to, here it is. Okay, we'll start it here. There we go. The miracles of technology, when technology works. Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, the next topic on our LubeTrends webinar today is about the fluorinated alkyl substances, PFAS for short. And I expect everyone who's signed on to the webinar today knows what the abbreviation stands for and knows something about what we're talking about here. Indeed, though, these are the first topic that we want to subtopic want to talk about is that these forever chemicals are indeed everywhere. They may be in your bodies, maybe at parts petroleum levels, but still there. They may be in our products, not necessarily because we intentionally add them. In fact, that's not likely the case, but they may be there as part of the contaminant in the raw material that we purchase, or perhaps even as a container. And we'll talk about that in just a second, or leaching from a container. The reason that these are so important right now is that the chemicals do not degrade easily. They can be degraded using some special techniques, but what has come to light is that there are health effects associated with them. And if I just read my phone here from the EPA website, just to show you the list that EPA has included, the health effects can include these: reproductive effects such as increased high blood pressure in pregnant people, developmental effects or delays in children, including low birth weight, bone variation, behavioral changes, increased risk of some cancers, including kidney and testicular cancers, reduced ability of the body's immune system to fight infections, interference with the body's natural hormones, increased cholesterol levels, liver damage. The list is quite extensive, and there may be some of these that are not cause and effect, but associations. But the agency, Environmental Protection Agency in the states, is certainly concerned enough to have taken a number of different regulatory actions here. Indeed, one of the things we just learned recently is that there is a company that modifies the HDPE containers Jeff was just talking about by fluorinating, passing fluorine gas through the containers to enhance their suitability for containing, for example, oil products. It turns out that EPA has just taken up a lawsuit with this company, which is known as Enhance, and that by using the process use that Enhance has created for fluoroalkyl substances in violation of the significant new use rule that EPA promulgated. And so this is just one more issue that we may be having to face. So if you're not already aware, you certainly are aware that these forever chemicals are now one of the topic of the days. Or in fact, they were included even on the national news last night. And why was that? That's because the regulatory environment is changing rapidly. You'll see on the slide there that EPA has proposed changes to the toxic release inventory. And one of the things that, so this was done to change the reporting requirements so that that certain of the fluoroalkyl substances would have to be reported, and in so doing, they would remove the de minimis exemption that would have perhaps shielded reporters from needing to report those materials. So the proposal for which EPA is now considering comments, would add these PFAS to the list of what needs to be reported on the TRI, and would result in not being able to use Form A to use that reporting. A second proposal EPA made is to designate certain PFAS as Superfund. That's the CERCLA hazardous substances. And that is another one which would be significant for us because it would then tie into Superfund sites, contamination that may have occurred in the past because of contamination with fluoride alkyl substances. Many states are taking action right now on an individual basis, but just yesterday, to show you how current the news is, just yesterday, EPA proposed drinking water standards for certain of the PFAS substances, including a 4 parts per trillion standard for perfluorooctanoic acid, one of the main ones that has been a problem in the past. Again, 4 parts per trillion. That's not a very big number. And the proposal that EPA is putting together, which they will be asking for public comment, just published just yesterday, shows you how serious an issue this is. There are insurance issues that come with that, liability issues that come along with this. Caitlin, if we can go back to Jeff, I think Jeff can add some more, color to this situation here with where we are with PFAS with insurance and liability.
Yeah, thank you, John. From my perspective, okay. Thank you, John. I mean, one of the things that when you listen to what John is mentioning, and certainly we've discussed it at the meetings at the various conventions, this is being a big problem. I think most of you probably heard of the ads on the TV and the radio for Camp Lejeune drinking water. Well, a lot of that is tied to firefighting foam, the AFF they talk about. That's a PFAS type of material. So what I want to do is here's kind of things you should be doing just besides following what's going on in this. There was a study published last fall by a group of professors that believe that there's over 57,000 untested chemicals manufacturing sites in the United States. They specifically identify lubricant manufacturing facilities in that study. So while this is continuing to evolve, I think it's important to go back and try to assess what kind of PFAS use your company may have had, both past and current. In the process of doing that, how was it acquired? Was it handled and disposed? So if you had a firefighting foam, a fire suppression system in the facility, and you had a discharge 25 years ago, where did those materials go? Clearly John talked about insurance issues. It's going to be more difficult as we go forward. So locating and making sure you have historical insurance policies, I think, would be important, particularly if EPA were to list the PFAS as a hazardous substance under the Superfund law. And lastly, it's just understanding what's going on with this 4 parts per trillion. The expectation is a lot of the water treatment facilities, the POTWs, are going to be responsible for cleaning this up. So to the extent that you have discharges to a POTW, it might be, in terms of assessing those discharges a little bit more for PFAS and having a conversation with them. And then lastly, if there's, ability to engage any of the legislators. I mean, there are law firms, and on this Camp Lejeune piece, there were specific things done by the trial lawyers in Congress that have foisted this with these ads that you see. Lifting caps on the lawyers, lifting damage claims and what the government can assert as defenses. So this is the next one coming, where these plaintiffs' law firms are going to be out there looking at this. And wherever they can find a pocket to pick, they're going to be looking to do that. So that's where I think going forward that probably as manufacturers, we need to be having conversations with other business groups, manufacturing groups, and Congress about some ways to keep this from coming into a picnic for the plaintiff's bar.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, John. Unfortunately, we are having some problems getting he might be on here. Our next panelist, I hope, is Jim Eggenschwiler. Jim, is that you?
I am here.
Wonderful. You're just in time. So everyone, we're happy to welcome Jim Eggenschwiler. He's principal of Global Trade and Chemical Regulation Services with Trinity Consultants. Those who are involved in ILMA's Global Affairs and Trade Committee would certainly be familiar with him and his expertise. So thanks for being here. Jim, please take it away.
Very well, thank you. Hello, everyone. Sorry for my last minute arrival, but technical complications required that. Looking at chemicals regulation, I focused on US EPA new chemicals because there have been some pretty substantial changes within the last 12 to 14 months. And I'm anticipating that this would apply to substances that are potentially synthetics or perhaps even more so additives. Many of these are now facing increasing data requirements, and that's primarily a focus on toxicology data. There are many substances that can where similar data can be found in other jurisdictions, particularly Europe, that can provide some read-across opportunities, but EPA is becoming increasingly skeptical of read-across and are attempting to push it out. So toxicology data is something that you need to consider, at least for select aspects of the chemical that you're wanting to register. Restrictions are routine. That has been a policy change for about about 2 years now within EPA, and so that's just a way of life now. There are not any what they call risk-free determinations. They all assign some aspect of risk, and they all involve a significant new use rule, which is a substantial restriction for any uses outside of what's approved in your PMN or your in your PMN. Delayed start time for review is constant. They have numerous terrible staff shortage problem, and they have a very inexperienced staff by and large. For those that they do have, they've lost a lot of their seasoned talent. Some of them have been promoted upward, but most of them have left the agency, and so this is a bad time for that. Recent completion timing, to give you an example, low volume exemptions, which allow you up to technically 10,000 kilograms per year, but functionally stop at about 5,000 to 6,000 kilograms, require a minimum of 6 to 8 months. That is legally a 90-day requirement. And at this point, they've never met the 90-day requirement, and the delays are much greater than is tolerated by the statute or the regulation, but nevertheless, it persists. PMNs are actually taking, they are supposed to be 90 days in terms of approval. Now, under the Laudenberg Act, we lost the benefit of the pocket approval, as we like to call it, in that if nothing happens within that 90-day required period, then it's considered approved and you can continue to commercialize. Now you don't have that right. So as a result, the 14 to 18 months that you see on the slide is a very real factor. And that is on top of the potential delay for EPA to actually open the file that was submitted and start the review. That can take an additional 60 days to 4 months, depending on what the backlog is, what the throughput is in the pipeline at EPA, and the staff level that they have at the time. That is improving. So that's the good news. But right now, the times that I have on here are what exists. Managing the EPA review process is essential, whether it's a low volume exemption or a pre-manufacture notification. The EPA review process is very specific. There are specific groups that review different toxicological aspects and profiles, and as a result, their risk evaluation, if left by itself, will stay within the thinking of the specific group that's reviewing it. Many of them are inexperienced. This can be a difficult process to try to initiate with EPA or with the staff, but it is successful or more successful in outcome if you can work with the program manager and engage with each of the individual committees that review the submittal, especially with a PMN, that are and they occur in a linear sequence. So it passes one committee or it's evaluated by one committee, and then there's a succession. And if you interact with them, you can often head off misunderstandings or misinterpretation of data, and sometimes have the opportunity to supplement data to a specific issue that is critical to the use that you want to apply for your new chemical. So those are some very important, though perhaps detailed points in getting a successful new chemical through EPA. But without following this process with care, what's happening right now to a lot of submitters is that the filing languishes for lack of attention for a considerable amount of time, and then once it is reviewed, substantial misjudgments occur within the evaluation process that then have to be that are more difficult to correct later. If you don't address it as it's going through EPA at the time in the evaluation, you often lose the ability to have any real influence over the final decision. Questions?
Thank you, Jim. If you can hang on, I think our next slide, we are tossing over to John Howell again to pick up hazard communication, and then we'll come back to you, Jim, for trade issues, hit on a few more trends to watch, and then we'll have our Q&A discussion. So please bear with us.
Oh, very good.
Yes, Caitlin, thank you very much. And yeah, to move things along a little bit, this hazard communication has been part of life for ILMA members, oh my gosh, since the mid-1980s. It's been a long time in our world. And the changes that we wanted to highlight for our viewers today are the changes that have just been published, just being January 4th of this year, in Canada to the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. And these amendments to the Hazardous Product Act, which were published, are important for all of us to consider. Not only if you do business in Canada, certainly if you're a manufacturer in Canada, you need to pay attention, but if you sell products into Canada through a Canadian affiliate or through a distributor, you need to be paying attention to this area as well. So what had happened is the changes to the Hazardous Product Act, officially published January 4th, take the LIMS regulations from the GHS Purple Book, that's the Globally Harmonized Standard Purple Book, version 3, up to version 7, and incorporating some parts of GHS Purple Book version 8, which is just what the US OSHA is trying to do. We'll talk about that shortly. But what Canada has decided is that there's going to be a 3-year transition process that goes to December 14th, 2025. Manufacturers, importers can use either the old system up until that date or the new system. You can't mix them up. You can't have an SDS or Windows SDS that is a combination of both. So you have to use one or the other. But you got 3 years to do it, which is important. In the Canadian regulations, they have promulgated defined ranges for trade secret ingredients. They've changed some of the classification criteria. This goes along with the changes that were in the Purple Book, Rev 7 and Rev 8. And perhaps the other difference you would see, besides the Section 3 ingredient list changes, would be changes to the physical properties in Section 9. And so, again, this is important to note if you're doing business in Canada, is that the new WMIS SDS system changes to that have now been published and are in effect. We expect OSHA, in fact, we have expected OSHA to have their new final proposal published by now, but indeed that's not yet happened. In fact, and Jeff can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I do not believe that it's even made it over to Office of Management Budget for review. So it's still going to be some time before we see it. So we don't know yet what OSHA is going to be doing, but key questions that we need to be looking out for when the proposal is published is what will be the transition period? Will it be at the same 3-year period that Canada has chosen to use? Will it be 2 years? Other things we want to look for is how will the US deal with trade secret ingredient ranges? How will they define normal conditions of use? Foreseeable emergencies. Will this date release for shipment on product label? How is that going to be handled? ILMA, as you may remember, made some comments 2 years ago. Now it was 2 years ago, I think, both written and oral, and we'll see just what the changes that OSHA had proposed in their notice of proposal making become finalized. One thing to note is that the U.S. Regulatory Cooperation Council between Canada and the U.S. has been going on all this time. And my guess is that the OSHA final proposal will mirror as closely as it can what has happened in Canada. We'll have to wait and see, because there are still some differences there that could make it not possible, for example, to have one SDS that's valid in both countries. But again, stay tuned for further details, and ILMA will certainly be keeping us all informed of new information from OSHA when it happens. There we go, Caitlin.
Right.
Turn it back to you.
Thanks very much, John. And next, if Jim would like to hit *6 on his phone, *6, that'll unmute you, and we can get you to talk about trade. Jim, I don't know if you can hear me. If you hit *6, that should unmute your phone. All right, no problem. We will hopefully be able to come back to him. Our next slide, we just have some more trends to watch that ILMA is keeping an eye on and will be disseminating information about. Of course, there's the FTC proposed non-competes rule. You've heard a fair amount about that from us already. ILMA will be submitting comments. The deadline for that has been extended to April 19th. And in this month's Compoundings magazine, March 2023, we have an article by our very own Jeff Leiter about how you can draft restrictive covenants in today's environment. One of the other issues that we're keeping a close eye on is supply chains. And in particular, we have our LubeTrends Live town hall that will be discussing lessons that we've learned from the supply chain challenges the past few years. That is at ILMA Engage, which is happening in Tucson next month. So let's bring all of our panelists back on and on camera. And we can kick off with some questions. The first one that I see here, I have one attendee, Matthew Moore, who raised his hand a while ago. Matthew, if you're still there and you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. All right, it looks like he might not be there anymore. So let's see.
Caitlin, while you're sorting through, can I make one comment?
Yes, please.
Sure. I just want to add something to what Jim Eggenschwiler was mentioning about chemicals management in Tosca. EPA did propose a significant increase in the user fees, both for new chemicals under Section 5 and evaluation of existing chemicals under Section 6. ILMA did submit detailed comments in January. Number of members indicated, how important this issue is to their companies. Most of them qualify as small businesses, and that reduction would not be as significant, but it was still a lot. So we proposed to EPA actually keeping the current small business fee as is. So EPA is in the process of evaluating those comments, and we think it's appropriate. We're in the process of drafting a letter to the appropriate committees on the House and Senate, House Energy and Commerce and Senate Environment Committee, about just our concerns that Jim was talking about in terms of you're making these significant increases. You just gave EPA an additional $30 million for this program. We shouldn't be having these kind of delays. And just to tell the folks with oversight that they need to really get on the agency's case here. So that's what I wanted to add about what Jim was mentioning.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And I actually realized I was remiss in not telling everyone, not introducing John Howell properly. John is the president of GHS Resources, and he's a hazard communications and chemicals compliance guru. And of course, folks on the metalworking fluids and SHERA committees know him very well also. And also with us, we have Ann Ball, who is ILMA's board president, to add a manufacturing member perspective. So we have one more question in the Q&A box, and that is, where is the location of the plastics recycling pilot plant in Atlanta? Jeff, do you know?
If you can give me a second, I'll come back to it. I'll see if I can pull it up. I know they were working with, it's either Napa Auto Parts or O'Reilly Auto Parts down there, but let me get it while we're going through this.
Okay, and while you're looking, I will also note that we are going to make the recording of this webinar available afterwards, in addition to an expanded slide deck that's going to have some additional resources, links to additional resources that did not appear on the screen today. So folks will have access to that afterwards. If there are any other questions, folks, please raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your screen, or you can type it into the Q&A box. And we have another one here from Mick Ragg. It says, for the R&D credits, would this include costs of higher tier toxicity testing that were requested by regulators?
That's a good question, and I'm not quite sure the answer. We can certainly look into it and get back to Nick on that.
Okay. Yeah, Mick, we will check back in. If you want to send an email, if you have any other details to add to communications@ilma.org, we'll see that as well, but we'll definitely follow up. Any other questions can go in the Q&A box. And I don't see any raised hands at the moment. So Anne, if you'd like to turn on your camera, or would you rather stay off?
I can't.
Oh, well, that
I've been trying. it's been a technology issue day, right?
Yeah, it has. See if you can do it now.
Okay.
There she is. So nice to see your face.
There we go.
All right. Well, if you don't mind, Ann, I'll toss my first question to you. What's top of mind for you as regulatory manager there at Qualicam?
Well, everything that's been talked about today, obviously, and all the other things that are waiting in the wings that I know that we as an association are watching and going to have some future webinars about. You know, it's just regulations change very quickly. And so, you know, to pinpoint one, it's a lot. So, you know, it's PFAS is a big thing. And obviously the hazard communication standard is going to be a big issue for us.
Absolutely. When it comes to the hazard communications, what challenges do you see for the industry from your perspective associated with these updates?
Okay, so actually what I see is the same type of issues that we had when HCS 2012 came into existence, as well as the current WMIS that's being used right now. I think there's going to be a learning curve for all of our members about the changes and the updates and how that really is impacting the current product SDSs and future product SDSs. I also think there's a time and manpower component to this that is really going to impact our members. You know, because we all know that we don't live in a vacuum. And so even though this is going to be very time consuming, there's a lot of other things going on at the same time, just running your business and day-to-day regulatory things. The other thing is making sure that authoring software, hopefully they'll be able to update quicker than they were and deal with bugs in software and things like that much quicker than they were during the first implementation. And I'm sure I could think of other things, but to me, those are the biggest issues right now with a new hazard communication standpoint.
Thank you. I see John with his hand raised over there.
Yeah, and thanks, Ann, for your comments. And just to add, and you just mentioned it's perfect lead-in. Many ILMA members, manufacturer members, some of the larger companies do use authoring software to help with the tremendous task of keeping track with the changes to the SDS, the many versions that we have or that you have for each product, and who they go to when they've been sent to a customer. But some ILMA members, the smaller ones in particular, may not use an authoring service company to help them to both author SDSs and then to track them. I would suggest, Caitlin and everybody, that for those members of ILMA who, for their own personal reasons, have decided not to use an authoring company, and they still have SDSs in Word format or that they convert to PDF format, however they do it, that without the authoring software, it's going to be quite the challenge to both understand the regulations and modify the SDSs accordingly here. I think the association can help along in this respect, but for those who do not use authoring software, the challenge for how to manage the process, no matter how much time you have, is going to be an issue for them. So just want to make that note.
We have another question that's come through the Q&A box from Richard Camper. He says, if you purchased a blending plant from another entity, do they have a responsibility to provide you with information regarding PFAS when they owned the plant?
I think that one's over. Before answering Richard's question, just the first question came up at the facility in Atlanta in terms of handling this pilot program on recycling quart. The facility, the bottles is called Next Circular, and it's based in Atlanta. So that's current that takes bottles, shreds them, and take pellets from that and sells them to be burned in resins. Answering Richard's question, so I'll approach it this way. To the extent that authority were to come after, let's say a speed situation, Superfund is what's called inquiry standard. So purchasing that for made and asked all of the right questions. With phase 1, phase 2. Currently, I don't think a lot of folks have looked at that. So in terms of, let's say, the obligation to ask the question, it probably doesn't rise to that level, but you certainly say under the current standard, we've done it. I would tell you I've been involved in the last 2 months in 2 transactions where the purchase and sale agreement, the seller makes a representation and warranty they haven't had release of a hazardous substance. And I will tell you that in the definition in that those asset purchase agreements, we now are including PFAS materials in the definition of hazardous substance. The seller has some obligation, even if you qualify by a particular individual. Knowledge that we're certainly inserting all the agreements for the issue for long.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. It looks like Richard has another follow-on to the question. So, Richard, I'm going to allow you to talk there if you want to unmute yourself.
That was a duplicate. Don't worry about it.
Oh, okay. All right. It looks like we might actually still have Jim Eggenschwiler on the line. So, Jim, are you there? Can we hear you? All right. Well, what we will do is try to get some extended notes from Jim to put on that slide. I don't see any
Caitlin?
more. Yes.
Okay.
Are you muted now?
Oh, Jim, is that you?
That's one of it. I'm one of them.
Wonderful. Okay. If you would like,
I've been having a difficult time getting off of mute, and it finally worked. So,
well, I'm so glad. If you would like to touch on the points you were going to make on trade, just in the couple minutes we have left, I want to make sure that folks get your insights on that.
Sure, and I can be quick about this. Fundamentally, the issue with China has to do with the continued application of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that was passed a year and a half ago. And what this does is it addresses forced labor in China, and that hasn't changed. That's in any meaningful way. But what has changed is that the forced labor details within China have spread beyond the Xinjiang region and are permeating other parts of China. So, and the impact that has is that just about any Chinese or origin product that you're importing, whether it's directly from China or indirectly through other countries, including Europe, the due diligence is required by the U.S. law that you actually, vet whether or not there was forced labor involved with the production of the material. That's not an easy task. That requires essentially vetting down through the supply chain to find out where the party that's selling the product to you, hopefully what due diligence they did on this subject, and if they can convince you that they did ample due diligence, then it might be reasonable to rely on that. Otherwise, you're going to need to get the information for their sources so that you can trace it back to China and have some reasonable showing should U.S. Customs inquire and pick you as the one that needs to make an affirmative showing on that particular import, that you can demonstrate that it's compliant with the act. That could be an easy process, or it could be a very difficult process. But in many cases, it's cumbersome, and it's slowing imports of goods that do have a connection to China. In Europe, the issue that is surfacing right now in many different ways have to do with the U.S. and in some cases European sanctions on Russian petroleum products. And how that's playing out is that these sanctions are being skirted or avoided by Russian companies, Russian sellers, through a lot of different techniques, misbranding the product, to utilizing, literally leasing vessels, cargo vessels, and delivering product to Europe or the U.S. under a different flag ship that supports the notion that it's not Russian product. There's all types of scenarios that are being tested, and as a result, there's a meaningful amount of volatility to U.S. importers and European importers of the volumes of these products that are actually originating from Russia, but are clandestinely entering the market. So that's something to be aware of. I would urge people to continue monitoring as best you can from a regulatory standpoint where things are at the time, and where your suppliers from whom you're importing are actually, how they're monitoring this, and where their sources actually are. And that's the best you can do. But there's a meaningful amount of risk that continues to linger with importation from Europe or from Russia, being or other non-European countries that can contain Russian or original product, and that's subject to U.S. regulatory prohibition. So it just to, I guess I can open that to question if there's any questions about that, or Caitlin, you can take it from here.
Yes, Jim, we do have a question from David Richards we'll try to take care of this real quick because we're a little over time. He says, can I assume Jim, comment on exporting to Russia? Is it similar to the import side?
Actually, it's not. Exporting to Russia has aspects of regulatory impact that you need to avoid. But to the extent that you're not prohibited by U.S. regulations, then that's a straightforward scenario. Either you have a regulatory obligation associated with that sale and shipment, or you don't. It doesn't have the clandestine aspects that you have to be careful about, Dave, that I was just speaking about.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. Like I said, we're a little bit over time, so I think we'll end things here. I want to thank all of our panelists again for generously sharing their time and expertise. And thanks again to Chevron Oronite for their sponsorship. Everyone, please keep an eye out for more LubeTrends virtual town halls like this one. And we hope to see you in person for LubeTrends Live at ILMA Engage next month, where we'll be discussing lessons from the supply chain challenges of the past few years. Thank you, all of our members, for joining us. Have a wonderful day.